Welcome. Thank you so much for 20,000 subscribers. It means a lot. Now, what you're about to hear is just one story. But every week there are others. Ones we can't risk airing to everyone. We lock them in the vault. Only members have the key. Click join to unlock your weekly exclusive episodes just for 69 cents per month. And starting this week, the 24/7 Grim Radio will be live. All of your favorite stories airing 24/7. It's been 6 months since I watched my sister die. I still see it when I close my eyes. The way her car crumpled like tissue paper under the 18-wheeler, the sound of metal screaming against metal on Black Hills Highway. I was 2 cars behind her, following her to Rapid City for lunch. I watched, helpless, as the truck driver fell asleep at the wheel, drifting across the center line. I was the first one to reach her vehicle, to see her crushed inside the wreckage while the trucker stumbled out of his cab, dazed and horrified. By the time the ambulance arrived from Custer, cutting through the afternoon rain, there was nothing to be done. Sarah was gone. The investigation was brief. The trucker had been hauling limestone from a quarry outside Pringle for 20 hours straight. Corporate pressure, they said. No criminal charges, just a company fine and an out-of-court settlement from the trucking company that was supposed to put a dollar value on my sister's life. I quit my job at the hardware store in Sioux Falls the next day. It felt pointless to keep selling tools and paint to weekend DIYers while the emptiness inside me grew. My therapist called it catastrophic grief response, but labels didn't help fill the void Sarah left behind. They say people respond to grief in strange ways. Some turn to religion, some to drugs. I turned to isolation, renting a small cabin on the outskirts of Pringle, population 112, trying to make sense of a world that suddenly made no sense at all. I spent those first months in a fog, watching dust motes dance in sunlight streaming through windows, listening to the wind in the ponderosa pines, and drinking too much wild turkey. Isolation in that little town was easy. Most folks were just trying to get by, not looking to adopt a stranger's grief. The money was running out when I saw the job listing at Buck's General Store, handwritten on yellow paper and taped to the community bulletin board. It was wedged between an ad for used snow tires and a flyer for the Pringle Volunteer Fire Department pancake breakfast. Night security, guard needed Rushmore County Museum of Forgotten Relics, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, $21 per hour. Call Harold Redhorn, 605-555-2157. I'd never heard of the Museum of Forgotten Relics, despite living in the area for months. But the pay was decent, better than I'd get at any of the gas stations or motels around. And night work appealed to me. Since Sarah died, I'd become nocturnal anyway, afraid to sleep when the sun was down. The nightmares were worse in darkness. I called the number from the payphone outside Buck's, not expecting much. The voice that answered was deep and weathered, like stone worn smooth by decades of wind. "Mr. Redhorn? I'm calling about the security guard position." Name? Direct, no pleasantries. Mike Gunderson. Experience? 4 years military security, Army. I hadn't mentioned my service to anyone since moving to Pringle. It felt like it had happened to someone else, in another lifetime. "Meet me at the museum tomorrow. 10 a.m. Junction of Old Hill City Road and Sheridan Lake Road. Look for the red mailbox." He hung up before I could respond. The next morning, I drove my rusted Chevy S10 down the winding roads, past abandoned mining equipment, and through patches of fog that clung to the valleys. I almost missed the turnoff. Just a gravel drive cutting between 2 hills, marked by a faded red mailbox with no name. The museum wasn't what I expected. No grand building, no official signage, just a sprawling, two-story structure that looked like it had once been a trading post, with wooden additions cobbled on over decades. The parking lot was empty except for an ancient Ford F-150 with peeling paint. As I stepped out of my truck, the front door opened. Harold Redhorn was tall and lean, with long silver hair pulled back in a neat braid. His face was deeply creased, like a topographical map of the Badlands, and his dark eyes held a sharpness that his age, which I guessed to be around 70, couldn't dull. "You're punctual," he said, extending a hand. "Come inside. I'll show you what needs guarding." I followed him through the door, not realizing then how completely that moment would change everything. Not understanding that some doors, once you walk through them, can never truly be closed again. The air inside the museum smelled of dust, old paper, and something earthy I couldn't quite place. Harold led me through the main hall, where display cases held objects that seemed jarringly out of place next to each other. A miner's helmet from the 1880s beside what looked like ancient native pottery. A collection of rusted medical tools beside a glass case holding a single worn moccasin. "The Museum of Forgotten Relics," Harold said, noting my confusion, "is not like other museums. We don't organize by time period or culture. We organize by significance." "Significance to whom?" I asked, peering at a case containing what appeared to be a child's doll made of corn husks, its painted face unsettlingly lifelike. "To the objects themselves," he replied, as if that explained everything. "Some things accumulate. Importance, power, memory. Most museums display what people want to remember. We house what would be dangerous to forget." I almost laughed, thinking it was a marketing line for tourists, but the grave set of his mouth stopped me. Harold showed me the security office, a small room with monitors showing grainy feeds from cameras throughout the building. The desk had an ancient computer, a logbook, and a coffee maker that looked older than me. "The job is simple in theory," he said, settling into a creaking chair. "Watch the monitors, make rounds every 2 hours, ensure nothing is disturbed or missing in the morning." "Seems straightforward enough," I nodded. "Worried about theft?" Harold's face remained impassive. "Not in the conventional sense." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a laminated sheet of paper. "These are the rules. Follow them without exception." I took the paper, expecting the usual security protocols. Instead, I read, "Night guard rules, strictly enforced one. Complete 4 rounds per shift. 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m., 6:30 a.m. Mark each completed round in the logbook with the time and your initials. 2. Carry your flashlight at all times, but use it only when necessary. Excessive light disturbs the exhibits. 3. The Native American burial artifacts in the East Wing are never to be approached between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. If you hear drumming from this section, do not investigate. Note it in the log and continue your rounds elsewhere. 4. If you notice an exhibit has changed position, do not attempt to correct it. Note the change in the logbook and continue your rounds. 5. The door to the basement archive must remain locked at all times. If you find it open, close it immediately and call Mr. Redhorn, regardless of the hour. 6. If you hear children laughing or playing, ignore it. Do not attempt to locate the source. 7. The small black telephone on the desk will ring occasionally. Answer it promptly, but never speak first. If no one speaks after 10 seconds, hang up and record the time of the call in the logbook. 8. If any visitor arrives claiming to have an appointment, regardless of their credentials, do not let them enter. Inform them the museum opens at 9 a.m. and suggest they return then. 9. Never, under any circumstances, Remove an artifact from its display case, even if it appears to be damaged or in need of repair. 10. If you see someone inside the museum who is not Mr. Redhorn or yourself, do not interact with them. Continue your round as normal, keeping at least 20 feet of distance at all times. I looked up from the list, expecting Harold to crack a smile, to tell me this was some kind of initiation prank. His expression remained deadly serious. "Is this for real?" I asked, tapping the paper. "Every word," he replied. "The previous guard lasted 3 weeks before disregarding rule number 3. He's at Monument Health in Rapid City now. The doctors say he might walk again by Christmas." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What happened to him? "He heard the drumming," Harold said simply, and he went to look. I swallowed hard. These rules seem unusual. This is an unusual place, Mr. Gunderson. He stood up, straightening his worn flannel shirt. The pay reflects the requirements. You need money, and we need someone who follows instructions precisely. Can you do that? I thought about my dwindling bank account, the rent coming due on my cabin, and the long, empty nights stretching ahead of me. What choice did I have? "Yes," I said. "I can follow rules." Harold nodded once. "Good. I'll see you tonight at 10:30 for training. Your first solo shift starts tomorrow." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Gary Walking Bear comes by at 6 a.m. to make coffee before he opens the gift shop. Good man. Skittish. Doesn't like to talk about the museum after hours." After Harold left, I sat in the security office, rereading the rules. Outside the window, clouds gathered over the Black Hills, promising another afternoon storm. I thought about Sarah, about how she would have laughed at the situation, her pragmatic older brother taking a job guarding cursed artifacts. "It's just a paycheck," I said aloud to the empty room. "Just a bunch of old junk with stories attached." From somewhere deep in the museum came a sound like glass gently tapping against glass, though there wasn't a breath of wind inside. I folded the rules and slipped them into my pocket. Just local superstitions, I told myself. Just another job. I had no idea how wrong I was. The thunderstorm had passed by the time I returned to the museum that night, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet pine and earth. The gravel parking lot glistened under my headlights as I pulled in beside Harold's truck. Above, the sky had cleared to reveal a scatter of stars, brilliant in the absence of city lights. Harold was waiting by the entrance, keys jangling in his weathered hands. "Before we start," he said without preamble, "I need to know if you have anything against you." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "Any unresolved grudges, enemies, debts unpaid, not just money, people you've wronged who might still be carrying that weight." His dark eyes seemed to look through me rather than at me. "No," I said, though the face of the truck driver who killed Sarah flashed in my mind. I pushed the image away. "Nothing like that." Harold studied me, then nodded slightly. "Some burdens you carry aren't yours to resolve. The museum knows the difference." Before I could ask what he meant, he unlocked the door and led me inside. The exhibits looked different in the dim emergency lighting, shadows deeper, glass cases gleaming like still pools of dark water. "First, the rounds," Harold said, handing me a heavy-duty flashlight. "Follow the marked path. Don't deviate." Brass plates were embedded in the floor every 20 feet or so, creating a winding route through the museum's labyrinthine layout. I followed Harold as he moved with surprising agility for his age, pointing out security sensors and explaining the museum's peculiar organization. "This section holds items from the mining boom," he said, gesturing to a display of pickaxes, sluice pans, and what looked like a partially melted gold nugget. Many men died in these hills, chasing fortune. Their ambition lingers. We passed through a narrow doorway into what Harold called the Pioneer Wing. Glass cases contained household objects, a butter churn, a hand-stitched quilt with an unusual geometric pattern, a child's wooden rocking horse with one ear missing. The snowstorm of 1888, Harold said softly, nodding toward the rocking horse. The Keller family, homesteading outside what's now Pringle. 4 children. Only the father survived. There was a reverence in his voice that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He wasn't reciting facts. He was acknowledging a presence. The Native American wing occupied the eastern section of the building. Unlike modern museums with their carefully worded placards about cultural context, this collection had minimal description, just dates and locations where items were found. I noticed small bowls of what looked like dried corn or tobacco placed near certain displays. Offerings, Harold explained, following my gaze. Some things need to be fed. I forced a laugh. You're really committing to the spooky museum vibe, huh? Harold didn't smile. Respect costs nothing, Mr. Gunderson. Disrespect can cost everything. We finished the circuit at the basement door, a heavy oak affair with an iron lock that looked more suitable for a medieval dungeon than a small-town museum. The archive, Harold said, patting the door like an old friend. Always check that it's secure, but never open it during your shift. Not for any reason. What's down there? I asked. Things that haven't found their proper place yet. He turned the key in the lock, checking it was secure. Things still deciding what they want to be. Back in the security office, Harold showed me how to operate the outdated surveillance system and fill out the logbook. Previous entries were sparse. Just times, initials, and occasional notes like movement in case 32 or drumming at 317 lasted 6 minutes. Your predecessor, Jeff Kinney, Harold said, tapping an entry from 3 weeks ago. Last note he made before he broke the rules. The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic. Drumming won't stop. Going to check source. What exactly happened to him? I asked. Harold's face grew somber. They found him in the Native American wing, pressed against the ceiling like something had grabbed him and tried to pull him through. Spine fractured in 3 places. He kept saying something had him by the ankles, something he couldn't see. I swallowed hard. And you believe that? Doesn't matter what I believe. Matters what you do when your time comes. Harold checked his watch. I'll leave you now. Your training is complete. Wait, that's it? I protested. I thought training would last all night. You know the rounds. You know the rules. He headed for the door. The rest is experience. He paused, hand on the doorknob. One more thing. If the power goes out, and it might in these hills, don't light any candles or matches. Darkness is safer than certain kinds of light. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the logbook, the rules, and a building full of forgotten relics. I told myself this was ridiculous. Harold was clearly indulging in local legends to spice up a boring security job. Ghosts and cursed artifacts made for better stories than make sure nobody breaks in and steals an arrowhead. At 1 a.m., I began my first round. The brass plates guided me through the museum's maze-like layout, my flashlight beam picking out oddities I hadn't noticed during the tour. A Victorian mourning brooch containing what looked like human hair, a miner's journal with brownish stains on the cover, a collection of weathered wooden dolls from a missionary school outside Pine Ridge, their painted faces faded to expressionless smudges. Everything was quiet, normal. I completed my round in 20 minutes and returned to the security office to log it. As I wrote my initials, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere in the building. Tap, 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 like fingers drumming on glass. I checked the cameras, seeing nothing unusual on the grainy feeds. The tapping continued, gentle but persistent. My first instinct was to investigate, but Harold's warnings echoed in my mind. Instead, I noted it in the logbook. Tapping sound 1:27 a.m., source unknown. The sound stopped abruptly at 1:30. The silence that followed felt expectant, as if the building were holding its breath. At 2:45, the small black telephone on the desk rang, its shrill bell making me jump. I remembered Rule 7 and picked up the receiver without speaking. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then a soft exhalation, not quite a sigh, not quite a word. I counted to 10 in my head and hung up, hands trembling slightly as I recorded the call in the logbook. The 3 a.m. round was uneventful, the museum still and silent as I made my way through the exhibits. But as I passed the Native American wing, giving it a wide berth as instructed, I could have sworn I heard the faint sound of drumming. So distant it might have been my imagination, or my own pulse in my ears. Back in the security office, I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling mindlessly through news articles I'd already read. Anything to distract from the growing unease crawling up my spine. At 4:53 a.m., all the lights went out. The emergency lighting should have kicked in, but the museum plunged into complete darkness, except for the faint blue glow of the computer monitor. I remembered Harold's warning about candles and matches, and instead flicked on my flashlight, keeping the beam pointed downward. That's when I noticed it. The faint impression of wet footprints crossing the office floor. Small, like a child's, they led from the doorway to the desk, then vanished. But I was alone. I'd been alone all night. I stood frozen, flashlight shaking in my grip, as somewhere in the darkness, a child's laughter echoed briefly, then faded to silence. I barely slept the next day. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw those small, wet footprints crossing the security office floor. My cabin, which had felt like a refuge from the world after Sarah's death, now seemed exposed. Too many windows, too many ways for something to get in. Around noon, I drove into Pringle and stopped at the Broken Spoke Cafe, the town's only restaurant. It occupied the corner of what had once been a general store, with windows overlooking the single main street. As I slid into a booth, Darlene, the 60-something waitress, who seemed to work every shift, brought me coffee without asking. "You're the new night guard up at Redhorn's place," she said. It wasn't a question. "Word travels fast," I replied, warming my hands around the mug. "Small town." She shrugged, pulling out her order pad. "The usual." I nodded, though I'd only been in twice before. Somehow Darlene had memorized that I liked the Denver omelet with extra peppers. As she walked away, I noticed a man at the counter watching me. Mid-50s, with the leathery skin of someone who worked outdoors, he wore a Pennington County road crew jacket despite the warm day. When our eyes met, he slid off his stool and approached my table. "You're working for Redhorn," he said, his voice gravelly from what I guessed were decades of cigarettes. "That's right." He sat down uninvited, coffee mug in hand. "I'm Ray Blackfeather. My nephew was a night guard there about 7 years back." I waited, sensing he had more to say. Made it 3 months before he quit. Wouldn't talk about why. Ray's eyes were hard. Then he started drinking. Bad. Wrapped his truck around a tree up near Rockerville last winter. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "I'm comfortable with where this was heading." "Before he died, he told me something. Said the things in that museum, they're not what Redhorn says they are. Said some of them came from places they shouldn't have." Ray leaned closer. places like the Wounded Knee massacre site, the mass grave at Fairburn where they buried those miners after the cave-in of '47. Mr. Redhorn seems to take respectful care of the artifacts, I said carefully. Ray gave a bitter laugh. That what he told you? That they're artifacts? He shook his head. You seem like an okay guy. Take some advice. Quit while you still can. He stood, leaving a few dollars on the table. Redhorn doesn't just collect things. He collects their stories, their pain, and pain has a way of wanting company. He walked out as Darlene returned with my omelet. She watched him go, lips pressed into a thin line. Don't mind Ray, she said, setting down my plate. Lost his nephew last year, still raw about it. But I noticed she made the sign of the cross after mentioning the museum. That night I arrived at the museum 20 minutes early, half expecting to find Harold waiting to offer more cryptic warnings. The parking lot was empty though, just my pickup truck and the fading light of sunset, painting the black hills in shades of amber and purple. I unlocked the door with the key Harold had given me and stepped inside, immediately hit by that same musty smell mixed with something earthy. As I made my way to the security office, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not by cameras, but by the objects themselves, their presence pressing against my consciousness like fingers testing a bruise. The logbook lay open on the desk, a new entry in Harold's careful handwriting. G. Walking Bear reports case 17, Cornhusk doll, facing east instead of north this morning. Returned to proper position. I flipped back through previous entries, looking for patterns. The Cornhusk doll was mentioned repeatedly, always found facing a different direction. The drumming in the east wing occurred most often between 3 a.m. and 3:30. And the phone, that small black phone on the desk, rang at least once during every shift, sometimes as many as 5 times. At 11 p.m. I began my shift officially, starting with a preliminary walkthrough before my scheduled 1 a.m. round. Everything seemed normal. The museum felt empty, quiet except for the occasional creak of the old building settling. In the Pioneer Wing, I paused at the display containing the one-eared rocking horse. Harold had mentioned the Keller family, lost in the blizzard of 1888. I leaned closer, reading the small plaque. Rocking horse, belonging to Emma Keller. 1882 to 1888. Found in the ruins of the Keller homestead after the Great Blizzard. The family's bodies were recovered the following spring, except for Samuel Keller, father, who survived by taking shelter in the root cellar for 9 days. Something about the story niggled at me. I made a mental note to look up more details when I had time. The Native American wing was dimly lit by emergency lights that cast long shadows across the displays. I kept to the marked path, respecting the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. restriction, even though it was barely midnight. As I passed a glass case containing what looked like ceremonial objects, I noticed small bundles of herbs placed at the corners of the display. Sage, I thought, recognizing the smell from a neighbor who had burned it at my sister's wake. Back in the security office, I settled in with a thermos of coffee, checking the monitors periodically. At 12:45 a.m., the small black phone rang. I picked it up, remembering not to speak first. For several seconds there was silence. Then a small voice, childlike but somehow ancient, whispered, "Is my papa coming soon?" My skin prickled. I counted to 10 in my head, the receiver cold against my ear. At 10, I hung up, my hand trembling slightly as I recorded the call on the logbook. The 1 a.m. round proceeded normally, the brass plates guiding me through the museum's winding path. As I passed the mining exhibit, I noticed something odd. One of the pickaxes in the display had shifted position, the handle now pointing toward the door instead of lying flat. Rule 4 echoed in my mind, If you notice an exhibit has changed position, do not attempt to correct it. Note the change in the logbook and continue your rounds. I made the notation when I returned to the office, adding it to the growing list of strange occurrences that seemed to be the norm in this place. At 2:30 a.m., the lights flickered 3 times, then stabilized. On the security monitors, nothing changed, just the same grainy images of empty halls and shadowed exhibits. But the temperature in the office dropped suddenly, my breath fogging in the air. Then I heard it, the sound of drumming from the east wing. A steady, rhythmic beat that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my chest. The rule was clear. Do not investigate between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Note it and stay away. I wrote in the logbook. Drumming began 2:31 a.m., East Wing. Then added, temperature drop in security office at same time. The drumming continued, neither growing louder nor fading, a constant pulse like a heartbeat. I found myself counting the beats, my own heart gradually synchronizing with the rhythm. 20 minutes passed this way, my eyes growing heavy despite the coffee and the strangeness of the situation. A sharp crack from somewhere in the museum snapped me back to alertness. On the monitor showing the Pioneer Wing, the glass case containing the rocking horse was now open, the case door swinging gently as if recently disturbed. Rule 9. Never, under any circumstances, remove an artifact from its display case, even if it appears to be damaged or in need of repair. But I hadn't touched anything, and the cameras showed no one else in the museum. I checked the time. 2:55 a.m. The drumming continued from the East Wing. I was trapped in an impossible situation. I needed to check if the rocking horse was still there, but that would mean leaving the security office while the drumming was ongoing. I decided to wait. The 3 a.m. round would take me through the Pioneer Wing. I'd check then, giving the East Wing a wide berth as instructed. At 2:59, the drumming stopped abruptly. The sudden silence felt heavier than the sound had been. I began my 3 a.m. round precisely on schedule, moving quickly through the mining wing and into the Pioneer section. When I reached the display with the rocking horse, I saw why the case was open. The toy was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. An artifact was missing on my watch. I played my flashlight around the room, searching for any sign of the wooden horse. The beam caught nothing but empty displays and shadows. Then I heard it, the gentle creak of wood, rhythmic and soft. Creak, creak, creak. The sound of a rocking horse in motion. I followed the sound to a small alcove near the emergency exit. There, rocking gently as if pushed by invisible hands, sat the wooden horse. As my flashlight beam fell across it, the rocking stopped. I approached cautiously, remembering Rule 10. If you see someone inside the museum who is not Mr. Redhorn or yourself, do not interact with them. Continue your round as normal, keeping at least 20 feet of distance at all times. But there was no one there, just the horse, its single remaining ear catching the light, its painted eye seeming to watch me with cold intelligence. "Who moved you?" I whispered, immediately regretting breaking the silence. The temperature plummeted further, frost crystallizing on the nearby display cases. From behind me came the sound of small footsteps, too light to be an adult's. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. A child stood at the far end of the room. A small girl in a nightgown, her face pale and solemn in the light. Her feet were bare and wet, leaving dark impressions on the floor. "Emma?" I said, the name from the display plaque coming unbidden to my lips. The girl tilted her head, studying me with eyes that reflected my flashlight like an animal's. "You're not my papa," she said, her voice the same one I'd heard on the phone. "No," I agreed, backing away slowly, trying to maintain the 20-foot distance rule while fighting the urge to run. I'm the night guard. The others weren't kind, she said cryptically. They tried to put us back in the boxes. Will you try to put us back in the boxes? Before I could answer, she flickered like a bad television signal, her form momentarily disintegrating into particles of shadow before reforming closer to me. 10 feet away now, not 20. I have to continue my rounds, I said, voice steadier than I felt. You should go back to your display. A smile spread across her face, too wide, stretching beyond the natural corners of her mouth. I'm not on display, she whispered. I'm just visiting, like Papa. She flickered again, reappearing at the doorway. Don't go to the basement, she said, her voice suddenly urgent. He's hungry tonight. Then she was gone, leaving only wet footprints that evaporated even as I watched. I completed my round in a daze, noting the missing rocking horse and the encounter in the logbook with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. As I wrote, the small black phone rang again. This time, when I answered, I heard only the sound of a horse galloping, fading into distance. Then the line went dead. The rocking horse had returned to its display case by the time Gary Walking Bear arrived at 6 a.m. I watched him on the security monitor as he moved through the museum, brewing coffee in the small kitchenette attached to the gift shop. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with short black hair and glasses, dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans. I hadn't mentioned the night's events in my end-of-shift notes. What could I write that wouldn't sound insane? Ghost Child warned me about the basement. Rocking Horse moved itself. Instead, I'd simply logged the drumming, the temperature drop, and the phone calls. When Gary knocked on the security office door with a fresh cup of coffee, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Rough night? He asked, setting the mug down in front of me. His eyes darted around the room, never quite meeting mine. Quiet, I lied. Just a long shift. He nodded, clearly relieved. Good, that's good. He fidgeted with his watch. Sometimes it's not quiet. Sometimes it's, you know. No, I said, leaning forward. I don't know. Maybe you could tell me what I'm really guarding here. Gary's face paled. I just run the gift shop. Sell dream catchers and geodes to tourists. He backed toward the door. Harold handles the collection. Gary? I pressed. A little girl appeared to me last night. Emma Keller. She said she was visiting. What did she mean? The coffee mug slipped from Gary's hand, shattering on the floor. You saw her? He whispered. And you're okay? Why wouldn't I be? Because she doesn't appear to just anyone. She chooses. He swallowed hard. She chose the last guy too, Jeff, before he broke the rules, I finished. Gary nodded, reaching for the doorknob. I need to open the shop. Harold will be here soon. Wait, I called as he slipped out. What did she mean about the basement? About him being hungry? But Gary was already gone, the sound of his hurried footsteps fading down the hallway. I couldn't go back to my cabin. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the Custer County Library, arriving just as they opened at 9 a.m. The librarian, a woman with steel gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, looked up as I entered. Can I help you? She asked. I'm researching local history, I said. Specifically, I'm interested in the Keller family. They were homesteaders who died in the blizzard of 1888. She frowned slightly. The Kellers? That's an unusual request. Not many people ask about them. She led me to a microfiche machine. We have some newspaper archives that might help. The Custer Weekly Chronicle covered the incident. I spent the next hour scrolling through grainy newspaper images, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. Finally, I found what I was looking for, a front-page story from April 1888. Tragedy on the prairie. Keller family found the bodies of Martha Keller and her 3 children, Emma, 6, John, 4, and infant Mary, were discovered yesterday when the spring thaw revealed the ruins of their homestead 10 miles northwest of Pringle. The family is believed to have perished during the January blizzard that claimed 17 lives across the territory. Samuel Keller, husband and father, was found alive in the root cellar, though severely frostbitten and delirious. Neighbors report that Keller claimed to have been tracked by the storm, unable to reach his family in the main house. "He's been saying strange things," reported Dr. William Hayes, who treated Keller's injuries. "Fever talk, mostly. But he keeps insisting something else was in that cellar with him during those 9 days. Something that made a bargain with him. Keller will be transported to the Territorial Asylum in Yankton once his condition stabilizes." I continued searching, finding a smaller article from 2 weeks later. Keller homestead investigation closed. Sheriff Thomas has concluded his investigation into the Keller family deaths, ruling them casualties of the winter storm. Questions raised about unusual marks found on the bodies have been dismissed as animal predation. Samuel Keller remains at Custer General Hospital, his condition unchanged. Dr. Hayes reports that Keller now refuses to speak and becomes violent when questioned about his family's fate. The Keller children's personal effects, including young Emma's prized rocking horse, have been collected by Reverend Stillwell for the church charity auction. I sat back, my mind racing. The rocking horse Emma appeared with, the one at the museum, had been sold after her death. How had it ended up in Harold's collection? And what had happened to Samuel Keller? I found one final mention in an asylum record dated October 1888. Patient Samuel Keller, admitted April 3, 1888, hanged himself with bedsheets. In the days preceding his suicide, attendants reported he claimed to see his deceased daughter Emma standing outside his window nightly, wanting to come in. Patient was buried in the asylum cemetery, plot unmarked at the request of remaining family. I returned to the museum just before nightfall, determined to speak with Harold before my shift began. His truck was parked out front, and I found him in the Native American wing, carefully placing small bundles of herbs around a display case containing ceremonial pipes. "Mr. Redhorn," I said, my voice echoing in the empty hall. "We need to talk." He didn't look surprised to see me. "You've been researching the artifacts," he said, straightening up with a slight grimace, his old joints protesting. "The Keller family. Emma. I saw her last night." Harold's eyes narrowed. "And yet you came back. Interesting." "What is this place really?" I demanded. "These aren't just artifacts, are they?" He gestured for me to follow him to a small office behind the main lobby, not the security office, but his personal space. It was cluttered with books, papers, and small objects I couldn't identify. A map of South Dakota covered one wall, dotted with red pins. "The Museum of Forgotten Relics," he said, settling into a chair, "collects objects that have absorbed significant experiences. Trauma, usually. They become anchors for energies that would otherwise remain unresolved." "Ghosts," I said flatly. "Echoes," he corrected. "Imprints. Not always of people. Sometimes of moments, emotions, unfinished business." He picked up a small stone from his desk, turning it over in his palm. "Indigenous people understand this better than most. Objects hold power, memory, purpose." "And Emma Keller?" "The girl I saw." Harold set the stone down carefully. "Some imprints are stronger than others. Some have agenda. What does she want? To not be alone, perhaps. To find her father." He shrugged. "Or to finish what began in that homestead in 1888. A chill ran through me. What exactly happened to the Kellers? Harold's face darkened. The official story is they froze to death. The truth? He shook his head. Samuel Keller did something in that root cellar, made a deal with something old and hungry that lives in these hills, something that Lakota knew to avoid long before white settlers arrived. What kind of deal? The only kind desperate men make, one where they promise something that isn't theirs to give. Harold's eyes met mine, hard as flint. He survived 9 days in bitter cold without food or proper shelter. You think that's natural? And now this thing is in your basement, I asked, remembering Emma's warning. Not precisely, but a doorway to where it dwells. Harold stood, signaling the end of our conversation. The rules exist for a reason, Mr. Gunderson. They keep the balance between what's been collected and what remains free, between the living and those who linger. Break them at your peril. Why tell me all this now? Why not before I took the job? A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. Would you have believed me? Would you have taken the job? He moved toward the door. Besides, Emma chose you. That's significant. Chose me for what? That, Harold said, is what we're going to find out. When I arrived for my shift that night, the museum felt different. The usual musty smell had intensified, mixed with something sharper, like ozone before a lightning strike. The security monitors in the office showed nothing unusual, but the air felt charged, expectant. At precisely 11 p.m., the small black phone rang. I hesitated before answering, remembering the galloping hoofbeats from the previous night. Finally, I picked up the receiver, saying nothing as instructed. For several seconds, only silence. Then a man's voice, ragged and desperate. Emma? Is that you? I've been looking for so long. The hairs on my neck stood up. Samuel Keller calling for his daughter. I counted to 10 in my head, fingers gripping the receiver so tightly my knuckles whitened. At 10, I hung up, noting the call in the logbook with shaking hands. 11 p.m. call. Male voice asking for Emma. Outside the office window, thunder rumbled across the Black Hills, though no rain had been forecast. The first round wasn't scheduled until 1 a.m., but something pulled me from the security desk. A need to move, to check the building, to assure myself that everything remained in its proper place. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the hallway, immediately noticing that the temperature had dropped drastically. My breath fogged in front of me as I made my way toward the mining wing, following the brass plates embedded in the floor. The first anomaly appeared in the Pioneer exhibit. The glass case containing the Keller family's rocking horse stood open again, but this time, the horse hadn't moved. Instead, a trail of small, wet footprints led away from the display, disappearing around a corner. Rule 4 echoed in my mind. If you notice an exhibit has changed position, do not attempt to correct it. I made a mental note to log the open case when I returned to the office, then continued my unofficial round. As I approached the Native American wing, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic drumming from deep within the east wing. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. Well outside the prohibited hours of 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. According to the rules, I could investigate. The brass plates led me deeper into the east wing, the drumming growing louder with each step. The display cases here contained ceremonial objects, pipes, drums, medicine bundles, and items I couldn't identify. Most had offerings of herbs placed around them, the sage scent mixing with the electric tension in the air. The drumming led me to a case in the farthest corner of the wing. Inside was a single drum, small enough to hold in one hand, its surface made from stretched hide, decorated with faded symbols in red pigment. The drum appeared untouched, Yet the rhythmic beating continued, as if invisible hands were playing it through the glass. As I watched, frost began forming on the case, ice crystals spreading across the glass surface in intricate patterns. The temperature plummeted further, pain shooting through my fingers from the intense cold. From behind me came the sound of bare feet on the wooden floor. I turned to find Emma standing there, her pale nightgown appearing bluish in the dim light. "He's calling," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "Can you hear him?" I thought of the phone call, the desperate man asking for his daughter. "Your father?" "Not him," she replied, her expression darkening. "The other one, the hungry one. Papa made a promise." Thunder crashed outside, closer now, and the lights flickered momentarily. When they stabilized, Emma stood directly before me, though I hadn't seen her move. "The basement door is unlocked," she whispered, her eyes reflecting my flashlight like twin moons. "He's waiting for you to check." Rule 5. The door to the basement archive must remain locked at all times. If you find it open, close it immediately and call Mr. Redhorn, regardless of the hour. "I need to go back to the security office," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to log what I've found and check the basement door." Emma's expression remained unchanged. "He's hungry," she repeated, "and Papa promised." She flickered like static, disappearing entirely. The drumming stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of my racing heart and the distant rumble of thunder. I made my way quickly back to the security office, checking the basement door as I passed. It was securely locked, Harold's heavy iron padlock in place. Relief flooded through me, though it was short-lived. When I reached the office, the logbook lay open, pages flipping by themselves, as if caught in a breeze, though the air was completely still. They settled on an entry from 3 months ago, the last night of Jeff Kinney's employment. 3:27 a.m. Basement door found unlocked, securing now. 3:40 a.m. Heard child crying in basement, investigating. Rule 10 doesn't apply if someone needs help. The rest of the page was blank, but a dark brownish stain marked the corner of the paper. I touched it gingerly, dry but unmistakably blood. The small black phone rang again, startling me. I picked it up automatically. "He didn't follow the rules." Emma's voice came through clearly. "Will you?" Before I could process this, all the security monitors went black simultaneously. A moment later, they flickered back to life, but now showed different views than before, angles of the museum I didn't recognize, sections I hadn't seen during my rounds. On the center monitor, the basement door stood open, darkness yawning beyond it. I dropped the phone and ran, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. The basement door was still locked when I reached it, exactly as I'd seen minutes earlier. I checked the padlock twice to be certain. Back at the security desk, the monitors had returned to normal, showing the usual views of empty hallways and silent exhibits. The logbook was closed, no sign of the blood-stained page I had seen. Thunder shook the building, and rain began lashing the windows. I tried calling Harold, but the phone line was dead, just a hollow buzzing when I lifted the receiver. At 1 a.m., I began my scheduled round, following the brass plates with meticulous care. Everything appeared normal until I reached the Native American wing. The drumming had started again, louder now, coming from the display case with the small hand drum. As I approached, keeping my distance, I noticed something had changed. The drum was no longer alone in the case. Beside it sat a small doll made of corn husks, the one I'd seen in the main hall on my first day. Rule 4 said not to correct moved exhibits, but this was different. 2 separate artifacts were now sharing a case that had been designed for one. I made a note in my mental log and continued, planning to document it when I returned to the office. The round continued without incident until I reached the mining wing. There, in the center of the path, stood a man, tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered clothing from another century. His beard was wild, his eyes hollow with exhaustion or madness. Frost clung to his hair and eyebrows. Rule 10 flashed in my mind. If you see someone inside the museum who is not Mr. Redhorn or yourself, do not interact with them. Continue your round as normal, keeping at least 20 feet of distance at all times. I adjusted my path to maintain the required distance, avoiding eye contact. As I passed, the man turned to follow my movement. "You've seen her," he said, his voice the same I'd heard on the phone. "My Emma." I didn't respond, keeping my pace steady, focusing on the brass plate ahead. "She looks like her mother," he continued, his voice breaking. "But she's not. Not anymore." I didn't understand what it would cost. Despite my determination to follow the rules, I found myself slowing. "What did it cost, Mr. Keller?" His eyes widened at the sound of his name. "Everything," he whispered. "Everything I loved." He was so hungry, and I was so cold. 9 days in darkness. Thunder crashed directly overhead, the lights flickering violently. When they stabilized, Samuel Keller stood directly in front of me, his face inches from mine. "The door is open now," he said, his breath visible in the cold air, smelling of earth and decay. "He's waiting. He's always waiting." I stepped back, maintaining Rule 10's distance requirement. The basement door is locked. I checked it myself. Samuel's expression twisted into something between grief and rage. "Not that door," he hissed. "The other one. The one only children can see." He flickered like a bad projection, his form momentarily transparent. Through his chest, I could see the hallway behind him, and a small figure standing there. Emma, watching us with solemn eyes. "Papa," she said softly, "it's time to go back." Samuel's face contorted in terror. "No," he pleaded, turning toward her. "Please, Emma, not again." "You promised," she replied, her voice suddenly adult, ancient. "A life for a life. 9 days for 9 souls." "I didn't know," Samuel cried, his form becoming less substantial with each word. "I didn't understand." Emma reached out her small hand. "Come, Papa. He's waiting." Samuel Keller gave me one last desperate look before his form dissolved entirely. Particles of shadow swirling toward Emma like iron filings to a magnet. She absorbed them with a small sigh, then turned her attention to me. "3 doors," she said cryptically. "3 doors in this place, 1 to enter, 1 to exit." She smiled, that too wide smile that stretched beyond the natural corners of her mouth. "And 1 that should stay closed." With that, she vanished, leaving me alone in the cold hallway. I completed my round on autopilot, logging everything I'd seen when I returned to the security office. The small black phone remained silent for the rest of the night, but twice more I heard the sound of galloping hoofbeats echoing through the museum, though I found no source. At 3 a.m. during my scheduled round, I discovered the cornhusk doll had returned to its original display case. The hand drum in the Native American wing sat alone once more. Everything seemed to have reset itself, as if the earlier disturbances had never happened. But in the Pioneer wing, the case containing the Keller family's rocking horse stood empty, the toy nowhere to be found. As I completed the round and returned to the security office, I heard it, the gentle creak of wood, rhythmic and soft. Creak, creak, creak. Following the sound led me to the basement door. There, rocking gently on the floor before the locked door, sat the wooden horse. As my flashlight beam fell across it, the rocking stopped. Slowly, impossibly, the horse's head turned toward me, its painted eye fixing me with a gaze that held centuries of patient hunger. From behind the basement door came the sound of something massive shifting its weight, followed by a low, rumbling exhalation that made the door itself vibrate in its frame. The basement wasn't empty. It had never been empty. I backed away, keeping my flashlight trained on the rocking horse. Rule 9. Never, under any circumstances, remove an artifact from its display case. But the horse had removed itself. The rules were changing. When I reached the security office, I found a new addition to the laminated rule sheet, a handwritten 11th rule in Harold's precise script. 11. If the black rocking horse appears outside its case, return it immediately. Use gloves from the desk drawer. Do not touch it with bare hands. Do not look into its eyes while moving it. My watch read 3:17 a.m. Outside, the storm had intensified, rain lashing against the windows as thunder shook the building's foundation. I had a choice to make. Follow Harold's new rule and return the horse, or wait until morning and have him handle it. As if sensing my thoughts, the security monitors flickered, showing a single image across all screens. The basement door, where the rocking horse now moved with increasing speed, its wooden runners scraping against the floor with each forward-back motion. Behind the door, something knocked. 3 times. Slow and deliberate. I reached for the drawer containing the gloves. The latex gloves felt thin and inadequate as I approached the basement door. The rocking horse had stopped moving, sitting motionless before the heavy oak barrier like a sentinel. Its single eye gleamed in my flashlight beam, the painted pupil seeming to track my movements. Thunder crashed overhead as I knelt beside the toy, careful not to look directly at it. Up close, I could see details I'd missed before. Tiny teeth marks on the remaining ear. A series of strange symbols carved into the underside of the rockers, and what looked like dried blood in the cracks of the aged wood. "Okay," I whispered, more to steady myself than anything. "Back to your case." The moment my gloved hands touched the horse, a bone-deep cold shot up my arms. The lights flickered violently, then went out completely, plunging the museum into darkness except for my flashlight beam. Behind the basement door, something heavy shifted, followed by the sound of wooden stairs creaking under significant weight. Fighting the urge to drop the horse and run, I lifted it carefully. Despite its size, it felt unnaturally heavy, as if filled with lead. I backed away from the basement door, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor, rather than on the toy's painted face. The knocking came again, 3 slow, deliberate knocks that resonated through the entire building. The basement door shuddered in its frame, but remained closed, Harold's padlock holding firm. As I carried the rocking horse through the darkened museum, I became aware of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows shifting independently of my flashlight beam, gathering in corners and doorways, watching my progress. The temperature continued to drop until each breath burned in my lungs. By the time I reached the pioneer wing, my arms ached from the horse's impossible weight. With trembling hands, I placed it back in its display case, closing the glass door with a soft click that echoed in the silence. The moment the case was closed, the emergency lights flickered back on. The shadows retreated, and the museum's temperature began to normalize. I exhaled shakily, removing the gloves and stuffing them in my pocket. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small handprint on the inside of the glass case, as if someone had pressed their palm against it from within. A child's handprint, perfectly formed in frost. "What are you?" I whispered to the rocking horse. "What are all of you?" The toy remained motionless, its single eye staring blankly ahead. But as I watched, frost began to spread across the glass surface of the case. forming words in delicate crystalline script. "He comes." I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. The message lasted only seconds before melting away, leaving the case clear once more. Back in the security office, I logged the incident in careful detail, though my hands shook so badly the writing was barely legible. The small black phone remained silent, but the regular phones were still dead. No way to call Harold or anyone else. At 4 a.m., I began my scheduled round, following the brass plates with renewed determination to maintain the rules. The museum was quiet now, almost peaceful, as if the return of the rocking horse had restored some essential balance. In the Native American wing, the display case containing the hand drum stood open, the drum itself missing. According to Rule 4, I noted it mentally, but made no attempt to search for it or close the case. As I completed the circuit and headed back toward the security office, I heard it, the soft rhythmic drumming coming from behind me. I turned slowly to find Emma standing in the center of the hallway, the small hand drum cradled in her arms. She wore the same nightgown as before, but now her feet were clean, leaving no wet marks on the floor. "He remembers you," she said, her fingers tapping gently on the drum's surface. "From before." "Who remembers me?" I asked, keeping my distance. "The hungry one." She continued drumming, the rhythm matching my heartbeat perfectly. "He knows your pain, your sister, the trucks on Black Hills Highway." The mention of Sarah sent a shock through me. "How do you know about my sister?" Emma's expression remained unchanged, but her drumming intensified. "The hungry one knows all pain, collects it, like Mr. Redhorn collects us." She tilted her head, studying me with those reflective eyes. "You carry such heavy grief. It calls to him." The realization hit me like a physical blow. That's why I got this job. Why I was drawn to Pringle after Sarah died. Whatever's in the basement. It was calling me. Emma nodded solemnly. "Grief opens doors, makes people vulnerable to bargains." She stopped drumming abruptly. Like Papa in the root cellar, 9 days with no food, no heat. He should have died with the others. "But he made a deal," I said, remembering the newspaper articles, "with the thing in the basement." "Not in the basement," Emma corrected. "The basement is just a door, one of 3. She began drumming again, softer now. "He promised 9 souls for 9 days of life. Me, John, baby Mary, Mama, 5 more over time." Her eyes met mine, ancient and knowing. "You would be the 9th. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead. "That's why you've been appearing to me, warning me." Emma's expression softened slightly. "I am bound to the bargain, but I don't have to help it. Time moves differently for us. I've seen this play out before, with others. Guards who broke the rules, who opened doors that should stay closed." From somewhere deep in the museum came the sound of hoofbeats growing louder. Emma's head snapped up, fear flashing across her face. "He's coming," she whispered. "The rocking horse is his eyes, his way of marking those he wants." "What do I do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Follow the rules," she replied, beginning to fade like mist in sunlight. "All of them, even the ones not written down." "What rules aren't written down?" I called, but she was already gone, the hand drum clattering to the floor where she had stood. The hoofbeats grew louder, coming from multiple directions now, as if a herd of phantom horses were galloping through the museum's halls. With them came a new sound, the creak of wood stretching and warping, the groan of nails pulling free from ancient boards. I ran for the security office, slamming the door behind me. On the monitors, I watched in horror as display cases throughout the museum began to shake, their glass surfaces frosting over with the same message. "He comes." The small black phone rang, shrill and insistent. I hesitated, then picked it up, remembering not to speak first. "Michael." My sister's voice, exactly as I remembered it. "Michael, I'm cold. Help me get out." My blood turned to ice. "Sarah?" "I'm trapped, Michael. Like the others. He's keeping us here. Please, the basement door. Open it." Tears burned in my eyes. "You're not Sarah." The voice changed, becoming deeper, raspier. "9 souls, Mr. Gunderson. The bargain must be kept." I slammed the phone down, my entire body shaking. On the security monitors, the hallways filled with mist, tendrils of it seeping under the office door. The hoofbeats had stopped, replaced by a heavy dragging sound, approaching the office. The door handle began to turn slowly. I grabbed the laminated rule sheet, frantically searching for anything that might help. Nothing addressed the situation directly. The handle continued to turn, metal groaning under immense pressure. As a last resort, I flipped the paper over. On the back, in faded ink that had to be decades old, was a single line. "When all else fails, salt the threshold and speak its name backward." Salt the threshold? I emptied my pockets. Nothing. Frantically, I pulled open desk drawers until I found a small container of salt packets, the kind that come with fast food meals. Gary or some previous guard must have left them after lunch. The door buckled inward, wood splintering around the hinges. Through the widening gap, I glimpsed something massive and formless, a churning darkness that seemed to absorb what little light reached it. I tore open the salt packets, pouring their contents in a line across the threshold. "But I don't know its name," I shouted, backing away as the door gave further. The security monitors flickered, showing a single image. The rocking horse in its case, now facing backward, its rear end pointing toward the glass. On its underside, carved into the wood, was a word in a script I didn't recognize. Desperate, I tried to pronounce it backward, stumbling over the unfamiliar syllables. The darkness retreated slightly, the pressure on the door easing. I tried again, louder this time, focusing on each syllable. The salt line began to glow with a faint blue light. The darkness withdrew further, a high keening sound emanating from it, like steam escaping a pressure valve. The final time, I shouted the reversed name, the strange words burning my throat like acid. The salt flared brilliantly, and the darkness recoiled completely, the broken door slamming shut with such force that the remaining hinges tore free, the wood crashing to the floor. Silence fell, broken only by my ragged breathing and the faint hum of the computer monitor. On the security feeds, the museum appeared normal again. No mist, no frost messages on the display cases. The rocking horse sat in its case, facing forward once more, as if it had never moved. As my heartbeat gradually slowed, I became aware of footsteps approaching the office. Human footsteps, heavy and purposeful. Harold Redhorn appeared in the doorway, surveying the broken door and salt line with an expression of grim satisfaction. "You managed it," he said, stepping carefully over the salt. "Better than most." "You knew," I said, anger replacing fear. "You knew it was targeting me because of Sarah, because of my grief." Harold nodded, lowering himself into the chair across from me. "Grief makes people vulnerable to its influence. It's how it finds most of its victims. How it found Samuel Keller in that root cellar, freezing to death while his family was already gone. Why didn't you warn me?" "Would you have believed me?" he countered. "Besides, there are rules to these things, patterns that must be maintained. The museum exists to contain what lurks beneath, but also to feed it. controlled sacrifices to prevent indiscriminate hunting. Sacrifices, I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue, like the guards who break the rules. Harold's weathered face remained impassive. The rules protect those who follow them. Always have. And Jeff Kinney? The guard who ended up in the hospital. He broke Rule 3. Went to investigate the drumming. Harold's eyes grew distant. We got to him before the bargain could be completed. He'll recover, eventually. Dawn light was beginning to filter through the office window. My shift was nearly over, though it felt like years had passed since I'd arrived the previous evening. "You should go home," Harold said, rising stiffly. "Rest. Process what you've learned." "And come back tonight?" I asked incredulously. Harold studied me for a long moment. "That's your choice. But remember, it knows you now. Has your scent. Inside these walls, the rules can protect you. Outside, ... He left the implication hanging. Why would I come back to this nightmare? A ghost of a smile crossed Harold's face. Because you've seen behind the veil now. And people like us, Mr. Gunderson, people who've looked into the dark and recognized what looks back, we can never truly turn away. We become guardians by necessity. As I gathered my things to leave, Harold added quietly, "Besides, Emma seems to have taken a liking to you. That's rare, and potentially useful." I paused at the door. What happens to her? To all of them? Can they ever move on? Harold's expression grew somber. That depends on whether their unfinished business can be resolved. Some have been here since long before I took over as curator. Others might yet find peace. And the thing in the basement? What happens to it? It stays hungry, he replied simply. It always stays hungry. I didn't go straight back to my cabin. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the winding roads of the Black Hills, watching the sun rise over the ponderosa pines. My mind replayed the night's events on an endless loop. Emma with her drum, the rocking horse's painted eye, the thing in the darkness pushing against the security office door. Eventually, I found myself at a scenic overlook near Mount Rushmore, the distant presidential faces barely visible through morning mist. I sat on the hood of my truck, exhaustion making my limbs heavy, but fear keeping sleep at bay. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The bargain isn't complete. He won't stop. H. Harold. I didn't bother asking how he got my number. I drove to the Custer County Library when it opened, ignoring the concerned glances from the librarian at my disheveled appearance. For hours, I combed through local history books, newspapers, and town records, searching for anything that might help me understand what I was facing. The pieces came together slowly. References to the Hungry One in Lakota oral histories recorded by missionaries in the 1860s, accounts of mysterious disappearances in the mines during the Black Hills Gold Rush, a pattern of unexplained deaths and bargains made by desperate people throughout the region's history. And always, the museum at the center. Or rather, the land it stood on. Sacred ground, according to Lakota tradition. A thin place, where the boundary between worlds was permeable. A doorway. 3 doors, Emma had said. 1 to enter, 1 to exit, and 1 that should stay closed. By late afternoon, I'd assembled enough information to understand that what lurked beneath the museum was older than the building, older than the town of Pringle, maybe older than human settlement in the Black Hills. It fed on pain, on grief, on desperate bargains made by people with nothing left to lose. People like me. As twilight approached, I found myself driving back toward the museum. My decision made despite my fear. If this thing had marked me, as Emma claimed, running wouldn't help. And if Samuel Keller's bargain was still in effect, It needed one more soul, a ninth victim to complete the cycle. The museum's gravel parking lot was empty when I arrived. No sign of Harold's truck. The building loomed against the darkening sky, windows reflecting the last orange light of sunset. It looked ordinary, unassuming, just an old trading post repurposed as a small-town museum. Nothing to suggest the horrors it contained. I sat in my truck, gathering my courage, when a tap on the window made me jump. Gary Walking Bear stood there, a thermos in his hand. I rolled down the window, the cool evening air rushing in. "You came back," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Not much choice," I replied. Gary nodded, understanding in his eyes. He handed me the thermos through the window. "Coffee. You look like you need it." I accepted it gratefully, the warmth seeping into my cold fingers. "Where's Harold?" "Went into Rapid City for supplies. Said he'd be back by morning." Gary glanced nervously at the museum. "You shouldn't go in alone tonight." "It already knows me," I said. "Inside or outside these walls, it makes no difference now." Gary's expression grew somber. "That's not entirely true. The rules, they create boundaries, structure. The things in there, they understand rules. Respect them, even when they try to make you break them." I took a sip of the coffee, the bitter warmth steadying me. "You seem to know a lot about it for someone who just runs the gift shop." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My grandfather was curator before Harold. I grew up in this place, learned its rhythms, its needs." The smile faded. "After what happened to my brother, I couldn't handle the night shift anymore." "Your brother?" Jeff Kinney." He looked away. "Walking Bear is our mother's name. I took it after what happened." The realization hit me. The previous night guard, the one who broke Rule 3. Gary nodded, pain etching lines around his eyes. He heard the drumming for 5 nights straight. On the 6th, he couldn't stand it anymore. Went to investigate. He swallowed hard. I found him the next morning, pinned to the ceiling like a butterfly in a collection, spine crushed, screaming about hands pulling him upward. "I'm sorry," I said. Inadequate words for such horror. Harold got to him in time, before the bargain was completed, but Jeff was never the same. Gary's gaze returned to the museum. "He sees things now, hears things. The doctors say he'll walk again, but he'll never be free of what touched him." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what you're dealing with." Gary's voice grew urgent. "This isn't just a job, and those aren't just rules. It's a containment system for something ancient and patient. Something that waits for mistakes. The thing in the basement. Not just the basement," Gary corrected. "The space between." The museum sits on a convergence point, what the Lakota called a thin place. 3 worlds meeting, the living, the departed, and something older than both. I thought of them as words about 3 doors, and Harold collects objects connected to this convergence. Objects that have absorbed trauma, death, grief. Gary nodded. They act as anchors, keeping certain energies contained. The exhibits are a prison of sorts, but also a feeding ground, controlled access to prevent indiscriminate hunting. "Like a zoo for ghosts," I murmured. "More like a wildlife preserve for things that were never alive to begin with." The museum's exterior lights flickered on automatically as darkness settled over the hills. My shift would start soon. "If I don't go back," I asked, "what happens?" "To me, I mean." Gary's face grew grim. "It will find you. Not right away, perhaps. It might wait until you're vulnerable, grieving another loss, facing another tragedy. But it will come. It always collects what it's owed. And if I go back, Follow the rules. All of them. He stepped away from the truck. Harold left something for you. In the security office. Said you'd need it. With that cryptic statement, Gary walked to his car, an aging Honda parked at the edge of the lot. Before getting in, he called back, "Whatever you decide, don't leave the salt line unbroken." It's the only thing that held after Jeff. After what happened. I watched his taillights disappear down the gravel drive, then turned my attention back to the museum. The choice before me was no choice at all. Face whatever waited inside, or spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for it to find me. At exactly 10:30 p.m., I unlocked the museum's front door and stepped inside. The interior was silent, the exhibits motionless in their cases. I made my way to the security office, finding the door had been replaced during the day. On the desk sat a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols similar to those I had seen on the underside of the rocking horse. Attached was a note in Harold's precise handwriting, "For emergencies only. The name must be spoken aloud to activate. Use with extreme caution." Inside the box was a small cloth pouch filled with what looked like salt, though the grains were larger and slightly reddish. Beneath it lay a folded piece of yellowed paper. I opened it carefully, finding a single word written in that same strange script I'd seen on the rocking horse. The entity's true name. Also on the desk was an updated rule sheet, now containing 12 rules. 11. If the black rocking horse appears outside its case, return it immediately. Use gloves from the desk drawer. Do not touch it with bare hands. Do not look into its eyes while moving it. 12. If you hear a voice claiming to be someone you've lost, do not respond to it by name. Do not make promises to it, no matter how small. Do not agree to help it get out. I tucked the pouch of salt and the paper with the entity's name into my pocket. A small comfort against what might come. Then I began my shift, hyper-aware of every creak and groan of the old building settling. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I completed the 1 a.m. round without incident, the exhibits remaining in their cases, the basement door securely locked. The small black phone didn't ring. No drumming came from the east wing. The quiet was almost more unnerving than the previous night's activity. At 2:30 a.m., I began to hear it. Not drumming, not hoofbeats, but a child's voice softly singing somewhere in the museum. A lullaby, the words indistinct, but the melody hauntingly familiar. I stayed in the security office, remembering Rule 6. If you hear children laughing or playing, ignore it. Do not attempt to locate the source. The singing continued, growing neither louder nor softer, a constant presence just at the edge of hearing. On the security monitors, nothing moved in the darkened halls. At 2:55 a.m., I prepared for my scheduled round, gathering my flashlight and checking that the salt pouch was secure in my pocket. The singing stopped abruptly as I stepped into the hallway. I followed the brass plates methodically, maintaining strict adherence to the rules. In the mining wing, all was quiet. In the pioneer wing, the rocking horse sat motionless in its case, its single eye staring blankly ahead. As I approached the Native American wing, I checked my watch. 3:17 a.m., well within the prohibited hours of 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. According to Rule 3, I should avoid this section entirely. I turned to detour around the east wing, but froze when I saw her. Emma, standing at the intersection of two hallways, her pale nightgown now stained with dark patches that looked like soil. "He's coming," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "The ninth soul, the final payment." "I'm following the rules," I replied, maintaining my distance. "He can't touch me if I follow the rules." Emma's expression grew sad. Rules change. Bargains evolve. There are older rules than the ones written on your paper. From the east wing came the sound of drumming, soft at first, then building in intensity. Emma's head snapped toward the sound, fear flashing across her face. "Not the drum," she whispered. "Not tonight. Run." I didn't question her warning. I turned and sprinted back toward the security office, the drumming growing louder with each step, joined now by other sounds, hoofbeats, children's laughter, the creak of wooden rockers against the floor. I had just reached the office when all the lights went out, plunging the museum into complete darkness. My flashlight flickered, then died, leaving me blind in the suddenly frigid air. From everywhere and nowhere came a voice. Not Emma's, not Samuel's, but something older, deeper, a sound like stones grinding together. "Ninth soul, come." The security office door slammed shut before I could reach it. I fumbled for the salt pouch in my pocket, my fingers numb with cold. The darkness around me deepened, not just an absence of light, but a presence of its own, pressing against me from all sides. "Bargain, fulfill." The voice reverberated through my body, making my teeth ache and my vision blur. I could feel it searching for a way in, probing for weakness, for grief, for that hollow place inside me where Sarah had once been. With trembling hands, I poured the reddish salt in a circle around myself, my fingers burning where the grains touched my skin. Then I unfolded the paper from Harold's box and spoke the entity's name. Not backward this time, but forward, claiming the power of naming what hunted me. The darkness recoiled, a high, keening sound cutting through the air. The salt circle began to glow with a faint reddish light, creating a barrier between me and the churning shadows beyond. "Mine," the voice insisted, the museum shaking with the force of its rage. "Promised." "Not me," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. "I made no bargain with you." From the darkness, Samuel Keller's face emerged, twisted with anguish. "Help me," he pleaded. "Free me from this." "You promised 9 souls," I said, understanding dawning, "but only 8 have been claimed. You're still bound to your bargain, trapped between completion and release." Samuel's form flickered, transparency revealing the darkness roiling behind him. "He holds us all. Emma, John, Mary, Martha, the others I sent to him over the years." His eyes met mine, desperate and haunted. One more soul would complete the cycle, free us. "At what cost?" I demanded. "Another takes your place? The cycle continues with a new bargain?" "Always," came Emma's voice from behind Samuel's apparition. She stepped forward, her small hand reaching toward me, but stopping at the salt barrier. "Always a bargain, always a cost. The hungry one must feed." The museum trembled around us, exhibits rattling in their cases, the floor itself seeming to breathe beneath my feet. The hungry one was rising, drawn by our conversation, by the possibility of completing its bargain at last. I clutched the paper with its name, my last defense against what was coming. Whatever happened next would determine not just my fate, but the fate of all the souls trapped in this cycle of ancient hunger and human desperation. I made my choice. 2 months have passed since that night in the Museum of Forgotten Relics. The Black Hills summer is in full swing. Tourists flooding the highways to see Mount Rushmore and Crazy Horse. Unaware of what lurks in the quiet spaces between attractions. I still work the night shift. The rules have changed. After I spoke the entity's true name, the museum transformed. Display cases shattered. Artifacts hovering in midair as the boundary between worlds thinned to transparency. I saw them all. Emma and her family, the other victims of Samuel Keller's desperate bargain, souls trapped in an endless cycle of hunger and containment. I offered the hungry one a different bargain. Not my soul, but my service. Not my death, but my life. dedicated to maintaining the balance between worlds. One night, every night, to feed its need for connection to the living world, in exchange for releasing the souls caught in Samuel's bargain. It accepted. Harold wasn't surprised when I returned at dawn, changed but alive. He'd made a similar bargain decades earlier, when the entity had marked him after his wife's death. That's how he became curator, not by choice, but by necessity. "It will hold you to your word," he warned me, his weathered face solemn in the morning light. "For as long as you live." "I know," I replied, feeling the weight of my decision settling into my bones. The Keller family has moved on. Emma, John, Mary, and Martha finally released from their century-long imprisonment. Samuel remains, his bargain incomplete but transformed. He appears occasionally, a solemn figure in the pioneer wing, watching me with hollow eyes as I make my rounds. We added new rules to the laminated sheet, rules specifically for me. The night guard who spoke the hungry one's name and lived. 13. When the drums begin at midnight, open the cabinet in the east wing and allow the music to play for exactly 17 minutes. No more, no less. 14. Leave offerings at the 3 convergence points marked with brass triangles. Salt on the first night of the month. Water on the 15th. Your blood, 3 drops only, at each new moon. 15. When the basement calls your name, respond only with, "I keep my bargain. Keep yours." My grief for Sarah hasn't diminished, but it's changed, tempered by my nightly communion with the boundary between life and death. I understand now that grief isn't something to overcome. It's a doorway, a thin place where worlds touch. Sometimes, in the quietest hours before dawn, I feel her presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. The museum's collection continues to grow. Harold and I travel throughout the Black Hills, retrieving objects that have absorbed too much pain, too much memory. A child's doll from an abandoned homestead, a miner's lantern found in a collapsed shaft, a beaded necklace unearthed at a construction site outside Pine Ridge. We bring them to the museum, catalog them, contain them, feed them. Gary visits sometimes, bringing coffee and news of his brother. Jeff is walking now, with the help of a cane. He still sees things that aren't there, still wakes screaming about hands pulling him upward. But he's healing, slowly. As for me, I found a strange peace in my role as guardian of this threshold between worlds. The hungry one still waits beneath the museum, ancient and patient, but our bargain holds. The 3 doors remain in balance, one to enter, one to exit, and one that stays carefully, deliberately ajar. Just enough to satisfy its endless hunger, just enough to keep it contained. If you ever find yourself driving through the Black Hills, past Pringle on the way to Custer or Hot Springs, you might notice a small gravel drive marked only by a faded red mailbox. If you do, keep driving. Some museums are better left unvisited, some relics are best forgotten, and some rules are written in blood for a reason.